glad to have you.
Maybe remember the
Hey.
I wondered if I'd seen him. I saw him in Waitman's the other day. Oh, we're newbies.
I've been here
He's had
before.
surgery. He had surgery.
Very good. I didn't know.
Unless you don't want to be known.
Yeah.
Under the radar. Three days.
Nice.
We changed our mailing address to here.
How's Alaska, Stu?
Alaska was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Unfortunately, our small cruise ship, which had 40 people in it, turned out to be a super spreader event.
Oh, geez, you're kidding.
Unfortunately, I got my booster 3 weeks beforehand, so even though I caught it, I wasn't sick. And there was another virus on board that my wife had. She didn't get COVID, but she got a respiratory virus that made her cough like all hell.
So what was the best part of that?
But other than that, the cruise was absolutely great.
You have to leave your room?
No.
I didn't think so.
The one person who tested positive, I mean, on about the fourth day, someone found out he had tested positive. So he had to confine himself to his room, which I would have driven me absolutely insane. Because, of course, those rooms are pretty damn tiny.
Gotta go outside to see
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
line.
you don't expect to see it. You wouldn't think.
Right.
Which cruise line are you on?
It's called Alaska Dream Cruises. It's a tiny thing out of six, I think 3 boats or 2 boats.
Oh, wow.
Is
Is there a Rhodes
They
Scholar
It's
program?
Rhodes Scholar program.
Oh, yeah, those are good.
Yeah.
They double with fishing boats, huh?
A little bit larger than that. And the problem was that we were in Glacier Bay, absolutely the next day, and another boat from that same line was in Glacier Bay and caught on fire.
Oh, geez.
Oh, my word.
You're not exactly a poster child for that company.
No. No, they were absolutely great, but
Yeah. How was the food?
food was delicious. Food was very good. A lot of fish.
A lot of fish.
So thank you for coming. Today's topic is going to be Stump the Professor. I've asked anyone who submitted a question to put one in, but if you have a question or anything about Parkinson's disease that you didn't know or thought you knew but were afraid to ask, that's what I'm here to do today. So we'll see how much I really do know about the disease. If everyone can be sure to sign in back there. If we have our annual picnic, Parkinson's picnic at Outhouse Park. I always find it interesting because it has nothing to do with the bathrooms. But Outhouse Park here in Canandaigua on July 26th at 11 o'clock. It's bring your own food because we're still living in the COVID era, so we try not to transmit disease. But if you wish to attend that, just write down, if you forget about it and you appear, that's no problem. But the reason we're doing this is so we can have a little bit of an idea of how many people might be there. If you have not found a name tag, it's probably because we haven't had you fill out one of our green forms with your address and name on it. Over on the name tag table are some of those green forms. Please fill them out so we can get you on our mailing list, our email list, and also so you can have a name tag the next time around. And there are a couple of blank name tag forms there that you can fill out today if you wish to have people know your name today. On the far table over here is literature. It has not necessarily to do with Parkinson's, but it has to do with things available in the community for support. There's a couple of brochures from Rocksteady Boxing and Safe at Home Physical Therapy, who are sort of our major PT group in the area. And usual format, will bombard me with questions for about an hour. Then we'll break into 2 groups. One is the people with Parkinson's who will stay here and continue to bombard me with questions. and also trade advice with their fellow members. The people, the care partners will then adjourn upstairs to the third floor at the far end and share all their woes and their secrets at that time, and so they can really badmouth this end of the group without being overheard.
I would be doing
So without further ado, first thing I'll go into is questions that I had. There were a group of questions from Jose back there. One wondering about long-acting versus short-acting levodopa carbidopa. And what you're trying to do, obviously, when you're treating someone to raise their dopamine levels by using levodopa and carbidopa, is you're trying to maintain as much of a steady state as possible. Unfortunately, the way our gastrointestinal tract works is you take your pill of levodopa carbidopa, it gets into your stomach, unfortunately it has to get into your small intestine before it starts getting absorbed. And it can often, especially as the Parkinson's disease progresses, it can be harder and harder and harder for that pill to make it out of the stomach and into the small intestine. Finally, it gets into the small intestine and starts getting absorbed, and what you see is beginning about 40 minutes after you've taken the pill, in the best of all worlds, the blood level begins to rise. It reaches a peak at approximately an hour to an hour and a half, and then gradually starts falling over the next 4 hours, so that by the time 6 hours are done, there's virtually none left in the bloodstream. The T1/2, which is the time it takes to lose half the dose that you have taken for levodopa carbidopa, is 3 hours. So that by the time 3 hours after you've taken the first dose, you're already down to half of the level that reached the peak. And one of the problems with Parkinson's, or with any disease, but especially Parkinson's, if you get too much of the medication on board, you start developing symptoms. Those are the dyskinesias, strange body movements. It can make you drowsy. It can make you nauseated, which is actually why carbidopa is mixed in with the levodopa. When I was in training, I won't say how many centuries ago, they were just starting dopamine trials. They were going to try to control Parkinson's disease with levodopa. Everyone got sick. They couldn't stand it. They got nauseated as all hell. The carbidopa helps suppress that by suppressing some of the breakdown of drugs in the bloodstream. So the carbidopa really helps not only you to tolerate the drug, but it actually helps promote absorption of the drug. So when the level gets too high, that's when you develop the side effects from too much of the drug. And then, of course, as the level falls, then you get into the off period, which means you are back to exactly how you felt before you took the drug. Which is why they have come out with long-acting forms of this drug. They're slow-release agents. And I'll go back to the single-dose levodopa carbidopa. You can get faster action if you crush the pill. But that's only for the single dose, not for the long-acting. You don't want to crush the long-acting drug form of it, because otherwise it's going to totally screw up the absorption. So for the single dose levodopa carbidopa, it helps to crush it. It helps to drink a lot of water with it to help wash it down. And that's because the stomach, of course, is shaped like a big sack. It swings down at one point and then narrows down once more. Liquids run down the lesser curvature of the stomach right into the small intestine. Solids settle down along the greater curvature of the stomach and don't get absorbed or don't get out of the stomach very rapidly. So by taking the pill, drinking a lot of water, that will help sweep it down the lesser curvature. Also, some studies have shown that if you drink orange juice or something with vitamin C in it at the same time that you take the pill, it will get absorbed more rapidly. So the recommendation is crush the single dose pill, stand up while you're doing it, bend a little bit to the right, because that's where the lesser curvature of the stomach is,
You look
and
right.
chase it with some orange juice. So of course, you're in a meeting, and your alarm goes off saying it's time for you to take the pill, so now you stand up, take a big glug of water, people are wondering if you're trying to do line dancing. So that's the approach to single dose, but what you're trying to do is develop a steady state. You don't want too much and you don't want too little. And one of the problems is that as the disease progresses, you are making less and less and less of your own dopamine. So you need to take more and more and more of the levodopa-carbidopa. So what's called the therapeutic window, in other words, when you're taking a medicine, you have this peak and valley. There is a block of that is the therapeutic window, where the drug works, but it's not overworking and it's not underworking. As the disease progresses, that therapeutic window narrows. So now you are either going to have to take a long-acting drug and then multiple small doses of the single-acting drug, or figure out some way to do it. So the advantage of the long-acting is exactly that. But frequently the start recommendation is when you start with levodopa-carbidopa, taking it before meals. And the reason I say before meals is because protein binds the levodopa-carbidopa in the intestinal tract, so it doesn't get absorbed. So you want to take your pill about 30 minutes before you eat, and at least 2 hours after your previous meal. And if you have to take it during a meal for some reason or other, you should really be doing something that doesn't have any protein in it. So it needs to be crackers or cookies or vegetables or things that are low in protein. So that's the whole concept of taking a long-acting drug. We usually start with, as I say, a dose before each meal, 3 times a day. And then often we'll use the long-acting drug at bedtime, because by doing that, by the time you wake up in the morning, you won't be in an absolute off period where you can't get out of bed. And so this allows you to have a certain level of the drug in your bloodstream that will be there when you wake up in the morning. And often what we end up doing is a long-acting at bedtime, long-acting in the morning, doses of short-acting during the day to try to get that steady state of the drug. And because all the drugs we use for Parkinson's disease have a lot of side effects and a lot of drug interactions, the recommendation of people who are experts in this field is that at least once a week, or perhaps twice a week, you should write down everything that you do from waking up in the morning to going to bed at night, or when you wake up in the night 2 times, including that, that might pertain to effects of the drug, interactions with what you're doing. So you need to write down sort of what your meal was, what activities you've had, when you took your medicines, because that way, treating Parkinson's is a very complicated puzzle, and it's different from person to person. We're all different. We all metabolize drugs differently. We all absorb them differently. Drug interactions are different between individuals. So we need to try to be able to figure out, when you come to the doctor's office, what's going on. And I know that many physicians are absolutely scared to death when someone comes in with a list. But with Parkinson's disease or any complex problem, you're not going to remember all the interactions. And so you want to damn well write them all down so you can show those to the physician, and that physician can figure out what's going where, or at least get a good idea. Other question was, yeah,
Crushing the pill, as you would say, crush all
Right.
the acid reflux.
pardon?
Acid reflux. What does it do with acid reflux?
Shouldn't make it any worse or better.
Well, when I take a pill and a half
Right.
together, I get acid reflux.
Right.
If I take them separately, I don't.
So that's a dose-related phenomenon. Okay. It's dose related, or do you break a pill? You've already cut that pill in half, is that it? So that may be some effect, but it's not supposed to. The other question on acid reflux is, have you been tested for Helicobacter pylori? There is a bacterium that is very common in the soil and actually used to be very common in our stomachs. About 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago when I first started this profession, 90% of us carried that bacterium in our stomach, and what it does is it promotes ulcer formation, but it also interferes with absorption of Parkinson's drugs, makes the drugs work less effectively, and actually speeds the progression of the illness. So if you've had any gastrointestinal stomach type symptoms suggesting too much acid, it's a good idea at least to mention that to your care provider. There's a breath test that can be done to detect that.
Thank you. How do you know if you're taking the long-acting or the short-acting version?
Your physician should have told you.
Well, we
Usually,
just started, so probably it's the
Yeah.
short one.
probably the short acting, you're taking it 3 times a day.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are a couple of, there is levodopa, carbidopa, extended release, generic. There is a long-acting form of Cinemat, which is one of the brand names. There is Rytary, which is a brand name of a long-acting combination, which probably gets you the smoothest release during the day. And there's just been a third, actually there are 2 more long-acting forms that are soon to arrive on the market.
Do you have any familiarity with Rytary? The effectiveness?
Pardon?
Do you have any knowledge of the effectiveness of Rytary versus the common?
There are less swings. If you look at this whole off-on thing, it reduces off time and increases on time. So it definitely, when compared to even using the long-acting form of Cinemat, along with levodopa, carbidopa, it gets a smoother amount of drug in the bloodstream.
Is there a reason that it's not covered by
Probably a lack of, probably the greed on the part of the drug company is quite expensive, is my understanding. So it depends on your plan, and if you have had problems with control of the symptoms and too much of the adverse response, having your Parkinson's specialist make an appeal to the pharmaceuticals or to the insurance plan might help. Yeah. He had one other question, 2 questions. One was, what's the value of detecting this disease early? As you've seen in the literature, the basis of this illness is a normal protein that's in your neurons called alpha-synuclein. What happens is something causes that alpha-synuclein to misfold. And proteins are very complex structures. They look almost like a can of worms swarming around. And when they're made in the body, there are 2 images of that protein that are made. There's a right-handed image and a left-handed image. And unfortunately, only the left-handed image, as my recollection serves me, works, the other one doesn't. But something causes this alpha-synuclein to misfold, so it doesn't function. It doesn't get broken down, so it accumulates in the neuron, eventually killing the neuron. And for people with Parkinson's, this alpha-synuclein appears to love the part of the neurons that make dopamine, which is why dopamine is the first thing that you start running out of. Eventually, all the other neurotransmitters get involved as well, but it usually starts out with dopamine being the neurotransmitter. So there are now tests where you can find alpha-synuclein in people. They've misfolded alpha-synuclein in people even before they develop Parkinson's disease. The problem is, and so the advantage would be that earlier you could make the diagnosis of Parkinson's, the more rapidly you could do something that would slow the progression or reverse it. The problem is we have nothing yet available that slows the progression or reverses it. At least no pharmacologic means. Exercise has been shown to slow the progression. So, which is one of the reasons why we encourage everyone to get in some variety of an exercise program. There are many that are online. Most physical therapy departments around the country will have programs specifically for people with Parkinson's disease. I know Thompson Health does. There is a group called Rocksteady Boxing here in Victor and also now in Geneva. Their specialty is treating people with Parkinson's disease. So there are a whole variety of exercise programs going on. So that's one thing that's been shown to slow the progression. For everyone else, why, who doesn't have a family history, why would you test yourself for something that might cause Parkinson's disease? And my recommendation would be no. There is a thing that I learned in pharmacology, God knows how many years ago, called Bayes' theorem. Bayes was a Protestant minister in England in the 1700s who was specialized in statistics. And Bayes' theorem tells us in medicine that if you have an illness that occurs in 1 in every 10,000 people, and you're one of the 9,999 who doesn't have the illness, and you do a test on yourself which is 99.9% accurate, or at least sensitive, will tell you that you have this disease. 10 people will test positive if that 10,000 people get this test, 100 of them will 10 of them will turn out to have a positive test. One of them will have the disease. The other 9 don't. And it's because it's a statistical phenomenon. So all these things that people go out and say, let me get tested for this and let me get tested for that, the incidence of false positives generally exceeds the incidence of real positives. And then your poor doctor, and I have plenty of experience with this, has to chase your tail around trying to be sure that you are one of the people who has the false positive test rather than regular test. So at this point in time, unless you have a family history, there is really no rationale to have people tested or to have children tested. If you're the sole person with Parkinson's, there's really not much risk, as far as we know, of your then passing this disease on genetically. And his final question was deep brain stimulation. As hopefully you have all been talked to by your neurologist, by your Parkinson's specialist, about deep brain stimulation. This is a method of putting electrodes in parts of the brain and turning on the electricity and actually getting rid of many of the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. It's very effective. Unfortunately, there seem to be 2 types of Parkinson's. There is the variety that starts out with a tremor and a very soft voice and microscopic handwriting, and then there's the variety that starts out with a very shuffling gait, troubles with the balance. So there's the tremor predominant, there is the gait balance predominant. Tremor predominant does very well with deep brain stimulation and also responds very well to dopamine. So if, as a person with Parkinson's, you have had a great response to taking your levodopa, you will probably get a great response from deep brain stimulation. It works very well. We have several members in our group who have had deep brain stimulation for 20 years or more. The group in Rochester are very proficient at this. And if your neurologist has not recommended it to you, ask the person about it. Needless to say, like any surgical procedure, especially doing things in your brain, there are potential risks, but the benefit is really rather exceptional.
How often do you have to have it done?
Once.
Just once?
Yeah, you have to have the battery changed every now and then, but the battery is placed
Got it.
elsewhere in your anatomy, and, yeah, just like a cardiac pacemaker.
Okay.
Once you put that in, that's there for the duration. You just have to change the battery to recharge it. Yeah.
Question about surgery
Yes.
and the effects of surgery on Parkinson's. When I had back surgery, my symptoms of Parkinson's just accelerated.
Right.
I need to have a left shoulder replaced, I may have to have a right hip replaced. What risk are there? Anesthesia, what's the risk of surgery?
It really looks to, the trauma of the surgery itself probably doesn't seem to have any major effect on it, but it's often the fact that your schedule of medications gets absolutely screwed up when you're in the hospital. The world runs on two times. One is time out in the real world, and the other one is hospital time. And the two bear no correlation to one another. In Parkinson's, the timing of your medicines is rather critical. You can maybe be 15 minutes off if you're lucky, but a lot of people with the disease will have their smartwatch with an alarm on it that says ding, it goes off when it's time to take their medication. That schedule gets totally thrown out when you're in the hospital. You're now on hospital time. You have a nurse who's distributing the medications maybe to 12 or 15 people. And so the 2 o'clock drug, they'll start giving it at 1 and end up giving it at 3. Needless to say, that gets your schedule totally out of whack. So often, what I see, and the literature sees, is that people coming out of the hospital after having had something done in the hospital have their Parkinson's disease dramatically worse. Now, whether surgical trauma contributes to that,
So it's,
there's no good literature on it.
so it's not physical, it's more chemical.
It's more chemical, yeah.
Huh.
So with a long-acting dosing before surgery, would be better to have.
Yeah,
What was that?
have a long-acting dose, so that take your long-acting before going off to the operating room. Yeah. And what we recommend, the problem is getting the hospital to comply, is that when you go into the hospital, you take your medications with you. Now, generally what they'll say is, okay, we'll take them to our nurse's station and distribute it from there. You insist that they're in the bedside table and that you're going to take them on your schedule. Often having a care partner with you to help support that. You may succeed in it, you may not succeed, but it's certainly worth a try.
So you can ameliorate that issue.
Yeah. If you can take the medicines on your schedule, you will come out of the hospital better than you would if you're taking it on their schedule.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you have surgery, is it better to have like a block rather than general anesthesia?
I don't know that there's any literature showing that the type of anesthesia has any effect on Parkinson's. I could be wrong because I'm not familiar with everything that's written, but not that I know of. Another group of questions I had was about urinary symptoms related to Parkinson's. Parkinson's generally starts out involving the motor neurons, but it can also involve what are called the non-motor neurons, what's called the autonomic nervous system. This is the part of the nervous system that controls your bowels and bladder, and blood pressure, and sweating, and a whole variety of other things. And frequently, symptoms caught from the autonomic nervous system can precede the Parkinson's disease diagnosis by many years, up to 20 years. Most common symptom from the autonomic nervous system is constipation because of damage to the neurons in the intestinal tract. The bladder is frequently involved. By the time you have come into the fairly advanced stages of Parkinson's disease, about 80% of people will have some variety of bladder dysfunction. And the bladder symptoms are two things go on. Either the bladder is overactive, which means it's going into spasm, you can't hold urine very well, you're going frequently, there's urgency, you have to get up in the middle of the night, loss of control of urine, and then there's where the bladder really doesn't contract very well at all. And those are symptoms of difficulty starting the stream and getting the urine going, and also the fact that the bladder keeps on filling up and not contracting, so you develop what's called overflow incontinence. You're sort of dribbling all the time. And those two are treated fairly differently. There are drugs that work for the spasm variety. The spasm variety will frequently respond to levodopa carbidopa, and the spasm variety is, my latest reading is this is the dopamine 1 receptors in the neurons of the bladder, and there is a dopaminergic drug, which I can get the name here somewhere written down. But one of the drugs which simulates the effect of dopamine in my microscopic print here is Nupro, N-E-U-P-R-O. This is a drug that simulates dopamine, but it also seems to specifically stimulate dopamine in the bladder, and therefore reduce the spasticity of the bladder. You can treat this with Botox injections. That works very well. One of the things people need to be doing who have an overactive bladder, they need to go to the bathroom regularly. You need to set a timer every 2 or 3 hours, get up and go to the bathroom so the bladder's empty, and getting rid of the problems with the spasms. You want to try to reduce fluids toward the end of the day so it doesn't wake you up in the dark of the night. So cutting down on fluid intake after late afternoon, not drinking coffee in late afternoon, no alcohol in late afternoon. That will help cut down on the having to wake up in the dark of the night. There are exercises for the pelvic floor that you can do. They're called the Kegel exercises. Any woman who has had a hysterectomy will tell you about the Kegel exercises. These are exercises that are done to try to strengthen up the muscles in the floor, in the pelvic floor, so you're having less trouble with control of the urine. There is actually a pelvic floor stimulator. There's a device you can buy that you can apply externally to your perineum. That's the spot between the scrotum and the anus, and the spot between the vagina and the anus. That if you stimulate that will help strengthen up the muscles. It looks like something you would buy in a pornography store, but it isn't. I'm sure it could probably be used for that. And we really recommend consult a urologist, because they can do testing to differentiate from the spastic bladder compared to the lax bladder. Often you can't tell the difference by the symptoms, and they need to do rather specific testing. They're also the people with the expertise of the drugs to use for this as well. I'm sure they will not be experienced with the use of our dopaminergic drug, Northera, but they have a variety of other drugs that can work. And then the last thing you can do is there's actually an implantable stimulator that takes care of the sacral nerve. That's the nerve that goes to the bladder and to the perineum. It can actually works like deep brain stimulation. There are 2 companies that have those on the market. I would, however, recommend you try everything else before going to having some implantable device. So, other questions? Don't feel free to ask.
Does entacapone?
Entacapone, that is, I believe, that's why I have my list. We have, it is,
You just to replace dopamine.
okay. I should have it down here, but I haven't. What are you using that for?
It's supposed to help with the carbidopa levodopa.
Okay, yes. It's it actually reduces, I'm pretty sure this is one that reduces the breakdown. Oh, no, here we go. Yes, COM10. It takes care of an enzyme called catecholamine O-methyltransferase, which is one of the enzymes that breaks down levodopa, carbidopa, and breaks down dopamine. And so it's added, there is a long-acting form of levodopa, carbidopa that has entacapone mixed in with it. And that's generally reserved for people later in the stage of the disease when you want to do everything you can to raise the dopamine level. But it makes the levodopa-carbidopa combination more effective, it'll make it hang around longer to keep it from being broken down.
What was the name of that drug?
Entacapone, Comtan is the brand name. Yeah,
Can you spell that?
COMTAN. And there are several. There are several of these drugs that can be added to the levodopa-carbidopa to reduce its destruction.
Can you explain, the questions I had is on the rescue inhalers,
Right.
and are they for both types of Parkinson's?
They're-
Or is it better for one, and when would you use it? And it's,
Well, it's an inhaled levodopa preparation. And so if you have a variety that is not very responsive or has been poorly responsive to levodopa, it probably won't work very well. It's more for the person with now the off time. They've missed a dose or they've overslept or something, and now they're awake and, oh my God, I can't
Get
move.
shot.
It's Inbrija is the brand name, but it's an inhaled levodopa-carbidopa, which is very effective, but it will take effect in about 20 minutes. So it's not immediate, but it's a little bit faster than if you crush the pill, swallow it, and take your orange juice.
okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
There's also a preparation, I keep on blocking my name on it, that's what happens when you get to be my age. It's a pseudo-narcotic, but it also has a dopaminergic effect. The problem with it is it causes intense nausea. So it is available in a sublingual form, it's available in injection form, and apomorphine is the name of it. And it's very effective in stopping off times. But you then have to take an anti-nausea drug routinely, so it won't give you nausea when you then have to take it. So I generally, when I'm talking about rescue drugs, avoid apomorphine really for that reason. And it's because so many of the anti-nausea drugs, this common anti-nausea drugs, and especially the one that's most commonly prescribed at this point, have an adverse reaction for people with Parkinson's disease. So I'm trying not to complicate people's things.
Well, just to feed off that, because he's taking lots of different drugs for various
Yeah.
things. What about drug interactions with the carbidopa?
A lot, and with all the Parkinson's drugs. What I recommend is there is a website called drugs.com. It's drugs.com. And there is a drug interaction part of it where you write in what drug the person is on. Now, obviously, when you're on 10 drugs, you're going to have to do this 10 times. And what the new drug is. And it will tell you what the interactions are. It's a great website. And it probably knows more, it certainly knows more than the doctor knows. and probably knows more than the pharmacist knows, but, you know, a very good thing. And be careful when it comes to drugs, anything, any over-the-counter thing, any supplement, they all can interact with Parkinson's drugs. So my recommendation is looking it up on drugs.com, asking your doctor, and when you go to your doctor's office, include everything that you are taking. If you're taking a stool softener, if you're taking a vitamin, if you're taking something for hay fever, anything of that sort, if you're taking one of these supplements that is supposed to make you bright and the next Nobel Prize winner, you know, be sure you write all those down that you're taking.
Is there a timing thing about when you take which drugs? Would that be on the same?
That would be on the same thing. Yeah.
Like certain things shouldn't be at the same time?
Shouldn't be given at the same time because they interact in the intestine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great site to use.
So what happens when you oversleep and you miss a dose, and how do you catch up during that? And do you just increase the next dosage, or what do you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I would recommend taking your dose then. And it all depends on the strength of the medication. Often what you can then do is take a little bit lower amount of it at the next timing. You know, when you were due to take your, let's say you missed the 8 o'clock dose, you took it at 10 o'clock, now you have a 12 o'clock dose coming up. I would take a smaller amount, maybe half the amount of the 12 o'clock dose, if you can do it.
Okay.
And then go back to your normal time.
All right.
And that's where it'd be nice to have your Imbregia, so when 2 o'clock comes along and, sorry, half a dose wasn't enough, you can, yeah. But you want to try to keep on your schedule as much as you can.
I know, but you know,
Yeah,
that's life, sleep.
life is life. Yeah.
Is loss of appetite common to Parkinson's?
Yes. Now, there is something other than loss of appetite, but weight loss is a standard feature of Parkinson's disease. I don't recommend developing Parkinson's disease to lose weight. But if you look at what happens to people with Parkinson's, they lose weight. Now, whether it's no appetite, whether it's they have internal tremor, so that's burning up calories, I don't think that, you know, if you look at the literature, nothing really seems to tell you why that is, but a very common thing is weight loss. And of course, anorexia is unfortunately part of levodopa, trouble with appetite.
What's diabetes? Good.
Diabetes and Parkinson's. 80% of people with Parkinson's will develop or have already developed diabetes. Parkinson's appears to be contributed to by a change in the microbiome in the intestinal tract. Microbiome is all those critters who live in your gut, which is something like 6 trillion fungi, bacteria, viruses, et cetera, et cetera. The microbiome breaks down what you don't absorb and uses that to generate its own energy. It also breaks down fats into what are called short-chain fatty acids. And those short-chain fatty acids are rather critical for the health of the intestinal tract. Something causes your microbiome to change. It no longer makes all those short-chain fatty acids, and then that seems to be what damages the intestinal tract and gets Parkinson's disease started. You're going to have to refresh me on your question, because I missed going into the next step.
Well, my next question would be, if you're going to have surgery done,
Yeah.
they don't want to touch you if you have, 7.5 or 8
Right,
A1C.
right. Yeah, so, back to diabetes, yes. And so this same thing that goes on with the microbiome in the intestinal tract in Parkinson's is what also seems to produce diabetes. And in fact, it's been found that some of the artificial sweeteners in soft drinks and such change the microbiome and actually make you more likely to develop diabetes. So the common denominator appears to be the microbiome, not your own genetics. But yes, Parkinson's and diabetes seem to go hand in hand. And it appears to be changes in the microbiome. And that's why there are a lot of studies going on right now on diet affecting Parkinson's disease. The Mediterranean diet, which is plenty of fruits and vegetables, whole grain cereals, whole grain breads, fish, less red meat, olive oil rather than other types of oils. That seems to produce a much more healthy microbiome. Having fruits and having multicolors, having a rainbow in your diet, yellow, red, green, blue, and, many different colors of foods that you can get. Things are obviously not things that are dyed, but having a rainbow of food, a lot of fruits, a lot of vegetables, whole grain cereals, etc., that seems to produce a more normal microbiome. And so there are studies going on right as we speak of seeing what effect that diet has on the development of Parkinson's. What you can say is that in areas with that diet, there is less Parkinson's disease. And this may actually have an effect on the progression of the disease. But those studies are out. They are in process, they're pending, and so we'll watch this space. But we all know that the Mediterranean diet is also good for preventing heart disease and high blood pressure and a whole variety of other things.
Can you speak to the oral disintegrating tablets?
It would probably work much faster.
We use them,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's been, with difficulty swallowing the capsules.
Right. Yeah.
We've included them. I just wasn't sure if people were familiar with them.
I'm not familiar with it, but if it's available, that would work much more rapidly.
Oh.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of it either. The benefit for me is that I get trouble swallowing and the anesthesia medicine in a panic because the medicine won't go down. And so what I do is I space it out several times during the day. I take the oral disintegrating tablet.
Right.
And it's very simple. You just put it in your mouth, you bang it on 5 minutes at the most, and it'll disintegrate into a little slurry.
Right.
So you can then swallow. And I haven't seen this any more expensive than regular herbal leaf. And I haven't seen any detriment to it at all. So it's been very helpful for us.
We used to go through periods where he would like for 5 or 10 minutes not be able to swallow the pills in his mouth.
Right.
And it was just sort of traumatizing too, to be honest. It was just really, really hard, day after day after day after day after day after day. And then I happened to have a speech pathology background and had asked about it, and finally the neurologist got on board and said, oh, why don't you try oral disintegrating tablets? So for all you people that may or eventually have difficulty swallowing, just be aware that that's available.
Because that, of course, is part and parcel of the disease. I mean, that is one of the functions, one of the things that goes in Parkinson's disease, which is why the change in speech, the muscles in the pharynx work less and less well, and that creates problems with swallowing. That's also why, if you look at complications of Parkinson's, one of the most common complications is what's called aspiration pneumonia, which is you swallow and it goes down into the lung rather than down in your esophagus. That responds very nicely to speech therapy. We encourage everyone to participate in a speech therapy program. Again, every speech therapy group around, there's one at Nazareth College, there's one here at Thompson Hospital. I think you can again get these things online. That therapy has been shown to improve swallowing and reduce the risk of aspiration as well. So, you know, your partner can complain that you're not talking loudly enough, but when they're coughing and choking, then that tells them they really need the speech therapy. But yes, the disintegrating tablet would be a very good idea.
There's a point about this same thing. It's not like nitroglycerin, which is not medicine.
Right.
Put it in your tongue, and then it works. Because if you put it on your tongue and keep it in your mouth, it doesn't do anything.
Right.
It has to go down and into your chest to be absorbed still.
Right.
So it's not like you can rest easy because you put it in the mouth and you have to pay to your intestines.
And with swallowing difficulties, often thin liquids don't work very well. So using something that's a little bit thick, unfortunately most things that are somewhat thick are also high in protein, so that would interfere with the absorption. But perhaps even something as, you know, I talked about orange juice. That would probably work very nicely to help swallow down the disintegrating tablet. Yeah, it will not work under your tongue the way nitroglycerin does. There is a form of the apomorphine that you can put under your tongue, but which dissolves and gets in your bloodstream, but not levodopa.
After his surgery, we had a speech therapist, and she was concerned about swallowing, and she said, put it in a spoon of applesauce. Because he was
Yes.
trying a big pill, it went right down.
Yeah.
So applesauce,
Yeah,
there's no protein.
that's the old thickened liquids.
Yeah.
Is the standard approach. I can tell you that my patients who had to be on only thickened liquids, not thin liquids, and so they were so disgusted with it. But yes, thickened liquids, putting a little cornstarch and things to thicken them up, or things of that sort, or applesauce or ice cream or any of those. Yes.
Sparkling waters, carbonated beverages are helpful in swallowing.
Extrasensory,
Right.
yeah, but
It stimulates, sizzles and bubbles and, yeah. Yeah. Good.
Can side effects with medication worsen with the length of time you're taking medication or increase in medication?
Yeah, that's why, again, I recommend writing down, because all these medicines have side effects, they all interact with one another. If you know, it's enough to sort of give you pause when you look at the side effects, but it's still a heck of a lot better than the disease. You know, there was a philosophy not all that many years ago that you didn't want to start levodopa right away because it would only work for a certain period of time. You wanted to wait until you really needed it. Finally, there was a good study done in Great Britain where they took people with new onset Parkinson's, treated them, one group with levodopa carbidopa, the other group they stayed away, used alternatives to levodopa carbidopa. The levodopa carbidopa worked fine all the way along, and the quality of life was far better in the people who started levodopa carbidopa early. So yes, but the longer you're on a medication, the more chance there is for other interactions. And we're all genetically, each one of us has our own genetic peculiarities, and we have people who acetylate drugs rapidly, and people who acetylate drugs slowly, and people that, that whole number of genetic differences.
Any connection between Parkinson's and kidney disease?
None that I'm aware of.
Because as you age, you get all these things, you're not sure what's related to which.
Right. But we'll never blame age. There is an association between Parkinson's disease and melanoma. People with Parkinson's disease are 3 times more likely to develop melanoma than people without Parkinson's disease, so we do recommend everyone check it with your dermatologist at regular intervals. Melanoma, of course, is a nasty skin cancer. Trying to think of other correlations.
the correlation of dementia.
Yeah, well, the dementia of Parkinson's, there
Yes.
are, we'll start out with what Parkinson's normally does to all of us. There is a cognitive component to Parkinson's disease that's not dementia. It's a problem organizing your life, making lists, doing things in order. It's what's called the executive function of the brain. That's a normal part of Parkinson's disease, and it does not make you prone for developing dementia. The dementia part of Parkinson's is an entity called Lewy body dementia. Lewy bodies are these accumulations of alpha-synuclein in the brain, named after a French neuropathologist in the 1890s. There is actually a Parkinsonian-like syndrome. It's caused by the same thing as Parkinson's, but it starts out with Lewy body dementia. But Lewy body dementia occurs in about 40% of people with Parkinson's. Over time, over quite a long period of time, 20, 30 years. My comment about statistics is always, when it comes to you and me, there are only two numbers. There's 0 and 100. You know, who cares whether it's 1 in 10,000? If you're that 1 in 10,000, you have it. But I wouldn't wake up, spend nights fretting that I'm going to become demented, because the odds are you're not.
Is there a time when carbidopa, levodopa will become less effective?
No.
It'll always be
Just a
okay.
matter of you need more and more of them.
Okay.
So the window, that therapeutic window keeps on shrinking. So you've got to figure out how to fill that therapeutic window.
Okay, but I understand what you're saying, but I'm thinking of all the years that I worked with people with Parkinson's, and you see somebody with the advanced stage, they're literally in a wheelchair because they cannot move. You cannot pump enough carbidopa, levodopa into somebody in the advanced stage of Parkinson's.
That's right. I mean, eventually, no matter,
So it becomes less effective.
eventually, no matter
Yes.
how much you pour in,
Yeah,
because the other things going on. I mean, you're having all the gastrointestinal issues of making it so you can't absorb the drug. When the small intestine stops working very well, bacteria that normally don't live there start growing there, and they break down the carbidopa, levodopa. So there are a variety of other issues. It may very well be that it's not the amount, it's not the lack of its working, but it's lack of its getting into the body. There are now 2 ways to deliver carbidopa, levodopa through something other than the mouth. One is through a tube in the small intestine, where the carbidopa, levodopa preparation is pumped in at steady state. The other one is like people now who are living and walking around with insulin pumps. Currently been approved, I think it's on the market, where the carbidopa, levodopa is put into the subskin space with a needle, same way insulin is put in with people with insulin pumps. So I think, I would say watch this space. We'll see whether the same sort of paralysis occurs late in the disease. I don't know, because we haven't been able to deliver it, routinely to the nervous system.
Fatigue. So is that a side effect?
Very common symptom. It can be part of Parkinson's, and it can be a side effect of levodopa carbidopa. The dopaminergic drugs, let me give you the name here, Requip, Mirapex, and Nupro are the ones that act like dopamine. They are less likely to cause fatigue than levodopa carbidopa. So if you find yourself being fatigued, first of all, see if there's any relationship between when you take your medicines and when the fatigue hits. If the fatigue suddenly goes away an hour after you take the medicine and comes back 3 hours later, then it's the Parkinson's that's causing it. If the fatigue gets worse 2 hours, 3 hours after, then it's probably the effect of levodopa carbidopa. Yeah.
And then one other thing is, so with exercise, so like bike riding and that,
Yes.
so I've noticed, like I'll go for a bike ride with my son and that. Sometimes when I get done and I get off the bike, then I'm stuck, like I can't, like it,
Right.
is that?
That's because you haven't had enough levodopa-carbidopa. Yeah. And that's something you could play with. I mean, you could say, okay, I'm going to be going on a bike ride, maybe 10 minutes beforehand, 20 minutes beforehand, take it just crushable dose of levodopa-carbidopa and see how that goes.
The way I think of it as an exercise is that you chew it up because you're moving. And because of that, you need some more when you start moving.
Right.
And, it's hard because Parkinson's is such a complex disease. Like everything's out of the body. And yet, we're getting older at the same time. So some of our symptoms are due to age, and some of them due to the medicine you're taking. So the fact that I feel like crap today, what does that mean? That means that either one of those things, all three want to do poorly. But it's hard because on a day-to-day basis, I've got spreadsheets about morning, noon, night, I'm doing, and bottom line is it's just frustrating. You got to look at the bigger picture, the overall track of it, put it as a given patient in terms of making decisions. You can't base it on a temperature, Parkinson's level is 10. And
Yeah, unfortunately, you're right. I mean, the problem is we're getting older, we metabolize drugs more differently with age. We absorb less well, and so we have all those things going against us. But that's why, again, I hate to keep on repeating the same thing. Make notes. Try to see if there's any pattern to things. My experience in medicine was I would prescribe a medication, I would go through the literature of it to see what the side effects were. 2 weeks later, the patient calls up and says, I'm getting this so-and-so symptom, and I think I've only had it since I started the medication. And I just look it up, and no, that's not a side effect of the medication. So I would have them stop the medicine anyway, and the side effect and the symptom would go away. So guess what? It's a side effect of the medication. It just hasn't been reported in the literature yet. So that's why you want to be sure that you are keeping track of, you take the drug X, and 2 hours later, symptom Y occurs. I always said 2 neurons and 1 synapse light up and should say, oops, maybe there's a relationship between the two. Very good. So I think we have some cookies over here. For people who would like some carbohydrate loading.
Let's explain what are in the cookies so that anybody with allergies will lose out on eating cookies. The basket standard chocolate chip, double chocolate. These are Wyoming Cowboy cookies, and they have coconut, pecans, chocolate chips, and a base of oatmeal. They both have sugar, but actually
so it'll taste good and keep you
the
regular
Wyoming Cowboy
and help your
cookies are
microbiome.
actually healthy, but they have double different.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you, Stu, for being here and to let you know how fortunate we are to have you as a leader in this class.
Yes,
I'm always one of those people who was curious, and when I finally retired, I won't say a very short number of years ago, even before then, the founder of this organization approached me and said, would I be willing to help participate in it? And I figured this is a chance to learn something new.
and no one ever said no to him.
No, he was right. You could never say no to John anyway. So.